everyone, my name is Angela, this is Paperbacks Galore, and today I'm going to be ranking all of my June and July reads from worst to best. We have 19 books to talk about, so I'm going to try to keep this snappy and focus more on my feelings rather than giving an in-depth synopsis. Coming in last at number 19 is When No One Is Watching by Alyssa Cole. This is a thriller about gentrification that takes place in Brooklyn, New York, and I ended up giving this one 2.75 stars. I don't really like thrillers. I love mystery books, but when it's more marketed as a thriller, I tend to not like it. And this one felt very much like a sad contemporary novel about gentrification until about the 70% mark. And then when we did start to get the more thrillery aspects, it was just like completely over the top in a way that didn't really make sense to me. So I would have preferred just reading a contemporary novel about gentrification. So this one didn't really work for me, but I think I would read more from this author, just not a thriller. At number 18, we have Finale by Stephanie Garber. This is the third book in the Caraval trilogy, which is a YA fantasy series that's very whimsical and romance focused. This series is absolutely not a favorite of mine. I gave Finale 3 stars. It's just kind of nostalgic. It reminds me of the kind of stuff that I loved reading as a preteen, and I don't know, it's just very fine. I enjoy the whimsy and the imagery of the book, but plot-wise, this one was very meh. Coming in at 17 is Two on a Tower by Thomas Hardy. This is a classic that is a romance between an older woman and a younger man, and the younger man is an aspiring astronomer. And the woman is actually married, but her husband has been away in Africa for a long time, and she ends up kind of supporting this younger man in his scientific pursuits because she has money and he doesn't. And it just gets quite messy. I feel like this is not one of Thomas Hardy's best, and I really didn't like the ending. I was gonna give this a 3.5 star until I read the ending, and then I was like, no, this is 3. So pretty disappointing. I still had a decent or good time throughout most of it, but just wasn't quite perfect or even very good. At number 16, we have The Midnight Feast by Lucy Foley. This is a mystery thriller. I actually have a standalone review for this book on my channel, so I won't go too far into it, but it's basically set at this luxury resort in England, and this is the opening weekend, and then shit hits the fan. We're following a bunch of different perspectives of people who are all very different. And yeah, this one was fine. I had a good, decent time. Not very memorable. I liked the kind of local lore that kind of came into the creepiness factor of this book, but definitely not a new favorite mystery by any means. Coming in at 15 is The Four Winds by Kristen Hanna. I also gave this book 3.5 stars. This is a historical fiction set in the Dust Bowl era in Texas, and then the family eventually heads west to California to try to have a better life because the Dust Bowl situation is ravaging the main character's son's health, so they really have no choice but to move. This was bleak. I was not really expecting how bleak this would be, and I think that's kind of why I didn't like it as much. I mean, it sounds very silly to say out loud because, like, why would this have been a happy book? But something about it just didn't quite grip me the way that some of her other books have. I thought this was really well done, just based on my particular taste. It wasn't amazing for me as a reader, but I can see how other people would give this 5 stars and have this as a favorite. Coming in at 14 is Not in Love by Ali Hazelwood. I also have a standalone review for this one. This is a contemporary romance set at a tech startup, and our main female character is a scientist, and our main male character is part of this finance group that's trying to take over the company. And our FMC is very upset about this. They end up kind of having a secret enemies with benefits situation that eventually turns into love. So I enjoyed this one. This one was very steamy, more steamy than her other books, and I had a good time, but definitely not a new favorite romance. Coming in at 13 is a graphic novel called The Tea Dragon Society by Kay O'Neill. This is just a short, adorable, cozy fantasy graphic novel. I believe it's middle grade. It's very quick and cozy and easy to consume, very lovely. I gave this 4 stars. I had a lovely time with it. I might continue on with the series someday. I'm not a huge graphic novel reader, but just something about the art style is just like exactly the kind of art that I really love, so I'm glad I finally got to this one. Coming in at number 12 is Black AF History by Michael Harriot. I don't tend to rate nonfiction. Sometimes I will rate memoirs just based on the craft of the storytelling, but when it comes to like a book about history or science or something, I don't really know how to rate it because it's like, yeah, I don't know if this is good. I'm not an expert in this field. But I'm putting it here within the 4-star books. We're kind of getting into a long stretch of 4-star books that I had to pit against each other. This book is essentially about American history, filling in some of the gaps where Black people aren't necessarily included in the narrative that you learn in school. And so we just get a lot of important stories that you maybe haven't heard of before, important context. If you like learning about history, I would highly recommend this one. It's not like a complete overview of American history, which is a little bit of what I was expecting, but I thought it was really good. What can I say? It was really good. I just realized I've been forgetting to hold up the books. Coming in at number 11 is The River of Silver by S.A. Chakraborty. This is a collection of short stories from her trilogy, the Daevabad trilogy, which is my favorite fantasy series of all time. So I read that series 2 years ago, and I really should have read this as soon as I got it, but I didn't. And I was nervous that I was not going to remember a lot of the details, but I was able to kind of look up some stuff about the side characters, and a lot came back to me. It made me want to reread the series very soon. So yeah, just a lovely time altogether. Coming in at number 10 is The Secret Lives of Church Ladies by Disha Philia. This is a collection of short stories. Some of the characters are queer, some of them are Southern, all of them are Black, some of them have to do with like romance, some of them have to do with familial relationships, and obviously the church. I had seen nothing but positive reviews about this book, and I did end up really enjoying this. I gave it 4 stars. I'm not necessarily a big consumer of short stories, but this really worked for me. I would love to read a full-length novel from this author, and I look forward to seeing what she does next. Coming in at number 9 is Ace of Spades by Farida Abike Amide. This is a YA thriller. I feel like the way that the publisher marketed this book is actually really perfect. It's Gossip Girl meets Get Out, and that is very apt. We're following the only 2 Black students at this very rich, fancy high school for really gifted students, and there's just some shady shit that starts going down, and they eventually realize that they are being targeted because of their race. And we just see both of their perspectives, and they have very different social standings within the school, and they're not really friends at the start of the book, so it's a very interesting journey that we go on. I was completely gripped by this story. I thought it was so entertaining. And again, I'm not really a huge fan of thrillers, but this one really worked for me, so 4 stars. Coming in at number 8 is Everyone in This Room Will Someday Be Dead by Emily Austen. This is a contemporary fiction, literary fiction novel that is both sad and funny. Our main character really needs a job, and she kind of accidentally gets this job at a Catholic church, even though she's not religious at all and a lesbian, and she knows that none of the people at this church would let her work there if they knew that she was a lesbian and also not Catholic. So she's essentially lying about who she is, and we just see her living through the situation. We see her family dynamics. It's just a slice of life story. I really enjoyed this. I love Emily Austen's writing, and this one made me cry. It was a little sadder than I expected. Coming in at number 7 is Real by Kennedy Ryan. This is a romance between a director and an actress. They are working on a biopic of a Black performer from like the 30s and 40s who's kind of been forgotten to history, and this is a very emotional, deep romance. I gave this 4 stars. I really enjoyed this. I was expecting this to be a 5-star, but we kind of shifted focus in the last like 20% and it wasn't quite what I wanted from the book. Otherwise this probably would have been like a new all-time favorite, but this was really good. Kennedy's writing is just perfect. She's an incredible writer and I will keep reading her books. I need to read more immediately because she's amazing. Coming in at number 6, we have The Poppy War by R.F. Kuang. This was a 4-star for me. There were moments when I thought this was going to be a 5. My favorite part was when we were actually at the school setting. Basically, our main female character is a young peasant girl and she is not in a good place in life. She's probably going to be forced to marry this old man, and the only way out is for her to ace this nationwide exam to get into the top academy in the country, which is the military academy, and she does. And so we watch her struggle through that experience, and then eventually there's a war that pops up. I really enjoyed this. The turn that it took wasn't necessarily what I was expecting. I'm excited to see where this series goes. I think that R.F. Kuang is a phenomenal writer, and I hope that either the second or the third book in this series is going to be a 5-star for me. But yeah, this was darker than I expected. At number 5, we have Mistborn: The Final Empire by Brandon Sanderson. This fantasy takes place in a world where some people have the ability to manipulate metals to perform different kinds of like magical abilities. And the main characters in this book are basically trying to overthrow the empire. So it's like a very big task. I thought that this was going to be a heist story going into it, but it's really like a rebellion story. And I really enjoyed this. I at first really hated the audiobook. I was trying to read along with the audiobook, but then I grew to actually love it, and now I can't read this series without the audiobook. So as soon as my audiobook hold comes in, I'm going to be reading the second one, and I'm really excited to get back with these characters and read more Brandon Sanderson because obviously the internet loves him, and I'm hoping he has a 5-star in store for me soon. Coming in at number 4 is Love and Other Words by Christina Lauren. I gave this book 4.25 stars. This was going to be a 4.5 or a 5-star. It was just, the ending was a little melodramatic for my taste, a little like CW twist. It was a little much, but watching these two people fall in love with each other and fall in love again as adults was an incredible time for me. These two characters initially bond and fall in love as teenagers when our female main character is at this cabin, and then in the present timeline we learn that they have had a falling out and they haven't spoken in like 10 years, and we're watching them reconnect, and I just fell in love with this story. It really worked for me. I loved their dynamic. I love how they bonded over books and words, and it was just as lovely as I hoped it would be, just not quite perfect. Very delighted that number 3 is actually a classic, and it is The Tenant of Wildfell Hall by Anne Bronte. When I tell you that I have owned this book since 2019, I'm not lying, and I finally got to it because of my TBR jar, so thank you TBR jar. This is set in the countryside in England in the 1800s, and there's this kind of semi-abandoned manor called Wildfell Hall, and the wealthy family who owns it has kind of left it, and suddenly a widow moves into this house, and so the inhabitants of the village or the area, I don't know what you call it, the nearby country folk are like, who is this girl? What's her deal? She's kind of cold and distant, and so there seems to be some kind of mystery going on with this woman, and then obviously we eventually find out her history. There's a bit of romance in here. I was just completely gripped. This was so well done. I gave this 4.5 stars. I really thought that the writing held up so well. Like in 2024 standards, I felt like this was so well written and like accessible. So I was very impressed and happy with this, and I'm excited to read more Anne Bronte. She is the last Bronte sister that I hadn't read from. So now we're up to our 2 5-star reads. I had 1 5-star in June, 1 5-star in July, and I had a really hard time choosing which one was going to be number 2 and number 1. Ultimately, I think both of these are going to be in my favorite books of the year list, but coming in at number 2 is Out on a Limb by Hannah Bonham Young. This is a contemporary romance that I did not read the synopsis of before I picked it up. I actually read this as an e-arc on my Kindle, and I loved it so much that I had to go to the bookstore and buy myself a physical copy. The basic synopsis of this is that 2 people meet at a Halloween party, have a one-night stand, and then the female main character gets pregnant, and they come together to raise this baby as friends. So we're seeing them kind of like during her pregnancy, becoming, friends, and of course falling in love. And oh my gosh, this was incredible. And I don't even like reading about pregnancy and babies. That's not something that I find to be, lovely most of the time. And so I'm so glad that I didn't steer clear of this book because I don't like that trope typically. The writing was wonderful. This was funny. I literally laughed out loud. I literally squealed out loud, like by myself in my room, squealed during this book because of how cute and tense and funny and awkward the situations were between these 2 characters. There's really great disability rep for both of these characters. I actually initially saw this book on a list of books with visibly disabled characters on the covers, and this is just a perfect romance book for me. A new all-time favorite romance book. I'm so happy I read this. I might go back and annotate this based on things I underlined in my Kindle, and I don't even like annotating that much, so that says a lot. And then coming in at number 1, we have the last book in a trilogy, and that is Assassin's Quest by Robin Hobb. It's kind of a toss-up for me whether the second book or this book is my favorite in the series, so I'll have to figure that out before my end of the year list, but I kind of consider this series to just be one very long story, so it's just my favorite story I've read this year. So in this series, it's kind of a medieval fantasy setting, and we're following Fitz, who is the bastard son of one of the princes, and so he is actually kept within the castle so that he doesn't become a danger, and he's actually trained to be the king's assassin because they're worried about him possibly turning on them someday, so instead he's completely loyal to them, and that's how they want it to be. This book is obviously the culmination of a lot of shit that went down in the series, and I can't really say much about it, but there are dragons in this book. There weren't dragons in the other 2, but there were dragons in here, and this is a really long book. This is about 850-ish pages. This is the longest book that I've read in a long time, and I just loved it. I love the audiobooks for this. I love the reading experience. I love the characters. I love the politics. I love the action. It's just amazing. So highly recommend this series, and I can't wait to continue with Robin Hobb. Those are all the books I read in June and July. Thank you so much for watching this video. Don't forget to subscribe if you want to see more bookish content from me, and I hope you have a lovely week.